All right. Really hope I'm recording. So, I lost my job in corporate, and I'm here to talk about how I actually survive at this point in life. Um, I would summarize it by saying God, but I'm gonna go into detail. Please forgive me if you hear the air in the background, but you know, things happen. Anyway, how I survived. So, to give you a little backstory, I used to work full time at a door company, a hardware company, um, as a customer service representative. I started in 2020, pretty much like a couple months into the pandemic. Probably, I think it was October. So, yeah, almost half a year into the pandemic. And I was working in office. I actually left a company that allowed me to work from home during the pandemic um, in order to get this job because I wanted mobility and I didn't see the path at the current company that I worked for. So because the company, because I was recruited by my old manager from company A, I was comfortable making the leap to company B. Went into negotiations, actually ended up getting an offer that was greater than I had negotiated for. And so, of course, I was happy. Sure, in part, that was probably because it was further distance. Um, Again, it was the height of COVID, and it was what I noticed when I got to the place is that they had a really hard time keeping employees. And I know that happens with a lot of companies, but in the first week or so of me working at this company, I seen pretty much the majority, well, let's just say I seen a good amount of people walk out the door. Um, Thankfully, not all of the veterans left because if they had, probably would have never excelled at that company. But in a couple of months, honestly, I think it was probably in a 30-day period, a position opened up in the company, and I decided to step up because nobody else stepped up, and I went from a customer service representative to a e-com data entry coordinator. So it's a lot like customer service, but you're dealing with e-commerce partners. There are a lot of behind the scenes things you have to do that you never do in customer service. Um, that I was able to do in a fairly short amount of time. But that wasn't enough for me. We actually ended up getting a house in on Thanksgiving Day. Actually, we submitted an offer on our house and it was accepted, and so we had to figure something out by the time we moved into the house. Um, of course, we were so excited, but when we eventually saw what the mortgage payment was at that time, man, it threw us off. It threw us off. We are not accountants. We are not math whizzes. We can do better at planning, and it was just like we got good credit. We both have really good credit. We had even better credit at the time, but it was just, man, the payment was high then and it's higher now. But January is when we moved into the house we're in now. And so I was feverishly looking for something. And then a position actually opened up. And I can't remember exactly when, but at the same time this position opened up. I was actually working my way through the IT support professional certificate program offered by Google. And this is like my third time taking this, going through this program, because every time I would start the program, I would get derailed by work or by life, right? Even though I was like working around my schedule and everything, I remember I was working at Marshalls at one point, and then I went from working at Marshalls to working in this warehouse, and I was actually taking the certificate program back then, and I was like 20, it was like 2017, probably 2017 when I was doing that. And man, life and work just got in the way, and I wasn't able to manage it. And I'm not making any excuses, but you know, it was a trade-off, and I made a decision, and the decision I made was to pursue the current work situation that I was in. And then, because it was a temp position, it wasn't guaranteed, and lo and behold, I actually was not fired, but laid off. There was a mass layoff of all the temps and everyone else. And that's when I ended up actually working for Company A, where I transitioned from A to Company B, where I held my last corporate position up until this point in 2025. That position ended in 2023, if I'm not mistaken. I was actually the only one working in the house. So, in addition to, and I'm skipping something, I eventually actually did get the position, one of the open positions, working at this corporation, Company B, and it was the most money that I had ever made annually at that time with one company. And so I felt good about it, but my wife was not working at the time, so of course there was still a lot of pressure for me to watch every dollar, be very organized for my money, be frugal, or more frugal than I would like to be, and just not blow my money. And because the money I was making literally was only enough to really pay for the home expenses, I had to find something else. And so what I did was I went to a former employer that I worked for in the past, Home Depot. Home Depot is literally always hiring, just like Walmart, probably just like Publix, a bunch of different places. But I go back to Home Depot and I start working there in their tool rental department. So now I have a full-time corporate job, salaried job at Company B, and I'm working at Home Depot part-time, about 15 hours a week on average, I would say. So yeah, that was about 60, close to 60 hours. There were definitely weeks where I worked 65 hours, 60 to 65 hours on average. And that became really challenging because I didn't know anything about tool rental. And I did my best to learn all of the tools at tool rental. But the training was very lackluster. It was very challenging to, to learn in real time. Of course, you do learn in real time if you spend enough time there. And I did, in fact, learn in real time. But it was still a challenge, and I put up with it for a while until I found another position at the mall as a photographer. And when I found that job, I replaced the Home Depot job. But this was a seasonal job, and it was with Cherry Hill Programs. And Cherry Hill Programs basically rolls out during the holidays, during Christmas and during Easter, to basically have a Santa or the Easter Bunny in the middle of the mall. And so I was doing that until the season was over. And so then, if I can remember, once the season ended, I had to find something else. Now, at the time, I was able to do gig work through various apps like DoorDash, for example, which is actually, I'll just cut to the chase. DoorDash was a part of my source of income from, from after that holiday was over, all the way up until, a couple months into 2023. But unfortunately, I was removed from the app, and I'm gonna get into that in another video. I'm gonna go ahead and explain that in its entirety of how that happened. But long story short, DoorDash was no more. So then I went on a Craigslist, and I actually found work. I found two situations. I found another gig called VHO. And I guess I'll leave the link that I have access to all the gigs that you could potentially find work through if you're in a situation like this. But I was on Craigslist, and I literally just replied to one of the postings, and it was for another delivery gig, just like Amazon Flex. Yeah, that's the best, most comparative company there is for what VHO offers. And the only thing about VHO is that at the time they only had one warehouse, and that warehouse was all the way in Atlanta. Actually, it was in Douglasville. So I had to travel more than an hour to get there, and a lot of times I had to leave home probably about 6 something to get there. And if you know anything about working these kinds of gigs, you have to arrive at a certain time, at a certain window. About 15 minutes early, minimum is the best is the best practice. So as you know, in Atlanta on any given day, there can be traffic out the wazoo, unexpected traffic, unexpected accidents, road closures, construction, acts of nature. Anything you can think of occurs when you have somewhere to be in Atlanta. Luckily, I never ran into a situation where I didn't make it, so I guess I'm just being facetious, but the truth is it was kind of rigorous, and the travel took a toll because, yeah, it might have took a little over an hour to get there, but because of when I would finish my routes, it took well over an hour and a half to get back, probably even closer to 2 hours on many different occasions. The money itself also was janky with working at VHO, because they would put projections in the app that were not guaranteed and were usually not correct, including the amount of time that it would take to perform the work, like a block of time, maybe a 2-hour time block as an example. And then all of a sudden, not only the time block was incorrect, but if you figure, if it says it's going to take 2 hours and they say they're going to pay you $48 for those 2 hours, and then it actually ends up taking you 3.5 hours instead of those 2 hours on the regular, not just one-off situations, but almost all the time, then you realize very quickly that you weren't making $24 an hour um, even speculatively. You know, even for someone who's seasoned, who knows that you need to account for the amount of time or the wear and tear on your vehicle, the trips there, the trips back. And the fact of the matter is, like I said, the routes were coming from Douglasville. So the issue with VHO is that, and with any delivery company, I would imagine, is that if you're on a route and you have an issue making a delivery, then you're responsible for returning that package all the way back to where it came from. That meant that I was responsible for returning packages back to Douglasville. And I had to do that on multiple different occasions. And when I did do that, the traffic on the way back would definitely have me, man, on the road from there back home for like 20 minutes. I'm sorry, 20 minutes. What I'm talking about? I'm thinking something in my head. For like 2 hours, for sure. Like easily 2 hours. So it was like, okay, this is just like my corporate job, where it took me an hour to get to work and an hour and a half to get home because of the traffic from living in the Snellville area, Snellville Grayson area, to having to go out to Sewanee for work. And the trips through Buford is what did it, is what was crazy. But to be quite honest with you, Buford and Grayson are just unbelievable when it comes to navigating the traffic. So those kept me in traffic for like 3 hours. Only difference with corporate is if it said I was making $25 an hour, because I was salary, I was actually making $25 an hour, you know, and had benefits. You know, I was able to give the entire family benefits. When you work these contract gigs, you don't get benefits through the gig company, so you would have to look in the market for those things. And I can tell you that by the time you pick up this third party healthcare, that you will have zero money, because you're not going to make enough money from the gigs to support your family. You know, but I did it. I did that on top of actually working in a mall at a toy store, which I did directly after the Christmas season was over with. And I did that, excuse me, I did that for 2 Christmases in order to make it. And that was under the table for some people. But they, you know, they would pay you contract. They would pay you like a contract, right? So you're a contractor. And then after, pretty much, because at this point, that's no longer a situation, no longer working for the toy stores. And VHO realistically only has work for, if you catch them on a Monday, you're good. Other than that, they roll out schedules the day in advance, and it's just like how Amazon was when I worked at Amazon. So if I know you're probably familiar with Amazon Flex or Amazon Delivery, and you've seen the vans, but at one point there were no vans. There were 0 vans, and there were just cars. That's it. It was just cars that, like my car, just like VHO, right? VHO doesn't have its own vans. They rely on the fleet of drivers and the vehicles that they own in their private lives, right? So privately owned vehicles are being used to make deliveries for VHO. And that was the case with Amazon when it first started out. Amazon actually, the very first, in fact, just to say, I was one of the first drivers to sign up with Amazon Flex when it first arrived in Atlanta. I was at one of the first warehouses to ever warehouse, you know, groceries and supplies and just stuff that Amazon sells. And the experience with working at Amazon was like VHO. You first off, the app had issues, right? The app had issues, but what I do remember very fondly is that I would have to tap because you had to tap to refresh. You actually, I think you might have had to pull down to refresh, right? So everyone's familiar with how refreshing your screen works on the phone, and in the app, you essentially instead of dragging down, you could tap and it would refresh. And because it was more demand for delivery work than there were actual deliveries, there would be there would literally people would just go to the warehouse and hang out at the Amazon warehouse all day, just waiting for work. And they will wait there and they would tap as fast as they can. I think a few people even had more than one phone because them and maybe their partner was in on it together. But for the majority of us, we just had to tap our phones, and then a offer would come up. And these offers were probably, I think, 4-hour blocks minimum at the start. There might have been some 2-hour, but I definitely remember them being 4-hour blocks. Probably like 75. I think there was a pay range of $75 to $100. So it was all based on whether or not you got tips with, tips during your deliveries. So you were guaranteed $75. You might make up to $100 for those 4 hours. So, man, listen. There was plenty of times where if I actually got a block, I would make those tips, especially during the holiday season. But it was very difficult at first to get a block at all. Right? Everybody's tapping, and then you see it come up, and then you tap on it, and it says, "Sorry, this is no longer available." And that happens so many times, and that's a really stressful way to live when you got bills due and you're trying to make money. But at that time, I was working at company A, and I was working in the warehouse, and I was making a fraction. I was making less in the warehouse than I was when I moved up to the front office. So I had to find a way to fill that void. And for me, working at Amazon at that time, when I was working at company A, was a way for me to do it. And I think that was about 2017. And you can fact check me and see when Amazon Flex first began. But I believe that's when it began, and that's what I was doing. Right? At this point, you can probably now get a block relatively easily. But I may be wrong because with so many fleets, with so many investors or entrepreneurs who have started their own fleet companies, their own Amazon businesses, they may have taken up a large portion of the work that was available. I don't really know because just like with DoorDash, I was removed from the app, the Amazon app. And now you get to see a trend. And so long story short, I don't have access to work in any of these apps other than VHO. I can't work in DoorDash, I can't work in Uber, I can't work in Amazon, I can't work in Instacart, I can't work in... Instacart was short-lived, by the way. Didn't like working at Instacart and having to make sure that an apple was medium rare, and I mean, I'm being funny, but seriously, like, the apple got to be this texture. Like, I understand food, people want their food a certain way, but when you realize that it's all subjective, and a person saying that they want certain food a certain way, and you get it to the best of your knowledge, what you think is the way that they're asking for it, it's just very hard to achieve when I started. And that was in the beginning. That was before Instacart was owned by Amazon. That was when Instacart just came out, and that's another trend. Every company that comes out, just like with VHO, which would be the latest company that I started with as a contractor. I usually start when these things are grassroots, when they're on when they're posting it on Craigslist, when they're the link that you don't want to click because you think it's a scam. You know, if I gotta go click on a public computer somewhere just to verify that it's real, like, I've always figured out a way to get to the money. But at this point right here, it's been really, really challenging for me. So now I'm turning to you, the audience, for advice. Because in the midst of all of this, I did start a company actually I started this company right before COVID. August 2019, started a media company. Right? I was just in it to do photography. Just ready to go out there and take pictures. You know, I had an affinity for taking pictures, and you know, I was enamored with the culture, the local culture here. I went to a couple of events, and you know, it got me excited about being and doing photography here in Atlanta, which now at this point itself has become a very competitive, if not saturated. But it's definitely competitive. There's so many photographers, there's so many creatives. You got to do a lot more to stand out, you know. And because there are a lot of good, talented creatives here. And so me, someone who actually did not go and get college educated in media, in photography, in filmmaking, to start a media company and for it to blossom into what it is now, which has become a media and news company where I'm trying to cover events, I'm doing red carpet events, you know, all through networking. You know, it's still hard to get to the dollar because there's only so many dollars to go around. And so if you're not putting yourself out there, you're not going out there and networking on the regular. You can network all you want through Threads and Instagram and Facebook, but you know, the fact of the matter is, if you want to reach a wider audience, you either have to run ads, do collaborations, which I'm very fond of, and plus know your marketing, your SEO, understand those things so that you can break through the different audiences. Something that I have been successful at for certain subsets of my overall business. Run ads and network. You gotta go outside. You gotta go talk to people. I've had opportunities 10 times faster just from being in the right place than I have saying the right thing on the internet, or you know, doing the right thing, having an incredible video, right? So that's where I'm at. Right now, I'm running out of options, and I'm trying to get this media business off the ground, but it's been very challenging. So this is kind of like a cry, a public cry, and just sharing my story, you know, to just explain things that I've done to stay afloat up until this point and where we are now. And the only thing that really saved me at this moment, after working, you know, a couple of retail jobs here and there that I won't mention, and no, they weren't Burger King and McDonald's, is that I was able to work for the church, doing what I love, doing broadcasts, you know, working as part of productions, you know, doing videography, doing interviews, and so on and so forth. But even then, the hours are not there. So, looking to fill the void, looking for answers, running out of options. So I'm starting this YouTube channel, hoping that this comes across, you know, someone who lives in Atlanta, who needs media services, needs someone who has integrity, someone who is collaborative, someone who has an eye, definitely got the eye. So just hoping that I'm able to figure that out.